My finger hovers over the screen, trembling like a leaf caught in wind, and I cannot bring myself to press the words block contact, even though I know I must, even though every rational part of my brain screams that this is the only way to save myself from the beautiful disaster that is Dominic Kane. The phone feels heavy in my hand, weighted down by 3 weeks of messages and calls and memories that have no business occupying space in my carefully ordered life. 20 calls today alone. 20 times my heart leapt and my stomach dropped, and I felt that dangerous pull toward a man I barely know but cannot stop thinking about. I close my eyes and see him as he was that first day, walking into my bookstore like he owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. All dark hair and darker eyes, and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He asked for a first edition Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and I nearly fell off the ladder I was standing on when I turned and saw him watching me with an intensity that made my skin flush hot. I remember blushing, actually blushing like some Victorian maiden, and the way his mouth curved into a smile that was both predatory and somehow gentle. I remember how his voice wrapped around my name when I introduced myself, how he made Olivia sound like a prayer and a promise all at once. That was 3 weeks ago, and in those 21 days, my entire world has tilted off its axis. The flowers started arriving the next day. White roses, always white roses, with cards that said things like, "Thinking of you," and "You have the most extraordinary smile," and "Yesterday changed everything for me." I told myself it was romantic, swept up in the fairy tale of a handsome stranger pursuing me with old-fashioned courtship. Then came the dinners, at restaurants I could never afford, where maitre d's treated him with a deference that bordered on fear, where other diners whispered and stared, and I pretended not to notice. He took me to the symphony, to gallery openings, to a private viewing of rare manuscripts that made my book-loving heart sing. He listened when I talked about literature and art and my dreams of expanding the bookstore. He asked questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. He made me feel seen in a way I had not felt since my parents died, and left me alone with nothing but their failing bookstore and a grief too large to carry. But there were signs, red flags I chose to ignore because his attention felt like sunlight after years of winter. The way people moved out of his path on sidewalks. The phone calls he took in Italian, stepping away with apologies, but returning with shadows in his eyes. The night we had dinner and 3 men in expensive suits sat 2 tables away, watching us, watching him, and when I asked who they were, he said business associates in a tone that ended the conversation. The driver who appeared whenever Dominic took me anywhere, a silent man with cold eyes and something that bulged under his jacket in a way that made my blood run cold. My best friend Jessa started researching him after the first week, worried by how fast I was falling and how little I actually knew. She sent me links, articles, a Wikipedia page that mentioned the Kane family in connection with organized crime in New York, with money laundering and racketeering, and things I did not want to believe about a man who held my hand so gently and kissed me like I was precious. Suspected connections, the article said. No convictions. Allegations. I convinced myself it was all rumor, all speculation, all the price of being wealthy and powerful in a city that loves to tear people down. Then last week happened. We were walking through Washington Square Park after dinner, his arm around my waist, and a man approached us. Not threatening, just walking past, but something about him made Dominic tense like a coiled spring. The man said something in Italian, something that made Dominic's jaw tighten and his eyes go flat and cold. Before I could process what was happening, the driver and another man I had not noticed materialized from nowhere, surrounding us. And Dominic was pushing me behind him with a protectiveness that would have been romantic if it had not been so clearly born from real danger. The man walked away laughing, and Dominic refused to explain what had been said, but I saw something in his face that terrified me. This was not business rivalry or professional competition. This was violence, barely leashed, and I was standing in its shadow. That night, I went home and really looked at what I had gotten myself into. I searched his name properly, diving past the society pages and business profiles into forums and true crime blogs and Reddit threads where people speculated about the Kane family operations. I learned that his father had been Antonio Kane, reputed head of one of New York's last old-school crime families until his death 6 years ago. I learned that Dominic had taken over at 26, that he was considered brilliant and ruthless and untouchable by law enforcement. I learned that people connected to the Kane family had a habit of disappearing when they became inconvenient. I learned that I was playing with fire and calling it romance. I called Jessa crying, and she came over with wine and held me while I sobbed out my fear and confusion. "Men like that don't take no for an answer," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to end this now, Livy, before you're in too deep to get out." But I was already in too deep, already addicted to the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered, already craving his voice and his touch, and the way he made me feel alive and terrified and exhilarated all at once. I tried to pull back, to create distance, but he noticed immediately. He showed up at the bookstore with coffee and pastries and questions in his dark eyes. He called more frequently, texted more often, as if he could feel me slipping away, and was tightening his grip in response. Today was unbearable. 20 calls between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. I answered the first 3, my resolve weakening with each conversation. And then I stopped answering, but I could not stop checking my phone every few minutes to see his name appear on the screen. The voicemails he left progressed from casual to concerned to something darker, more possessive. "Olivia, pick up. I need to hear your voice." And later, "You're avoiding me. Whatever you think you know, whatever scared you, let me explain." And finally, just an hour ago, his voice rough with something that sounded like desperation. "I know what you're thinking. I know what you found. But you don't understand the whole story. Please, Cara, don't shut me out. Talk to me." The endearment in Italian broke something in me, because it was what he called me in soft moments, when we were alone, and he let his guard down and became just a man who looked at me like I hung the moon. Now here I sit in my apartment above the bookstore at 10:47 p.m., rain beginning to tap against the windows, Hemingway purring on the couch beside me, staring at my phone screen with my finger hovering over block contact, and my heart breaking into pieces I am not sure I can put back together. The apartment feels both too small and too empty tonight. Shelves of books that usually comfort me, now seeming like inadequate protection against the choice I'm about to make. The white roses he sent this morning sit on the kitchen counter, wilting already, their petals brown at the edges, like my hope for something that was probably doomed from the start. I take a breath and press the button. Block contact. Confirm. The screen changes and his name disappears from my recent calls, and just like that, Dominic Kane is erased from my phone, if not from my mind. Relief floods through me, mixed with a grief so sharp it steals my breath. I did it. I actually did it. I pour myself wine with hands that shake so badly, I nearly drop the glass. And I tell myself, this is the right choice. The only choice. The choice that keeps me safe and sane and alive. "I barely know him," I whisper to the empty apartment, to Hemingway, who watches me with knowing green eyes. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of flowers and danger, and those damn eyes, and I nearly lost myself completely. The wine tastes bitter on my tongue, but I drink it anyway, needing something to do with my hands, needing to feel normal even though nothing feels normal anymore. I open my laptop and pull up the articles again, forcing myself to read them properly this time, to see the man behind the romance. Dominic Kane, 32, suspected connections to the Kane crime family, no convictions despite multiple investigations. There are photos of him at charity galas and business meetings, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by men who look like they could kill without blinking. There are articles about his business holdings, restaurants and real estate and import companies that are probably fronts for whatever his family really does. There are older photos, too, from his father's funeral 6 years ago, showing a younger Dominic with grief carved into his beautiful face, standing beside a teenage girl who must be his sister. I never asked about his family beyond surface questions. I never pushed when he deflected. I let myself be charmed and seduced and willfully blind, because being the center of his attention felt like standing in sunlight after years of cold. My phone sits silent on the coffee table, and I resist the urge to check it, to see if he has noticed yet that his calls are not going through. Part of me wants him to notice, wants him to feel the loss of me the way I am feeling the loss of him. Part of me hopes he will not care, that I will be just another woman who drifted through his life and out again without leaving a mark. But I know better. I saw the way he looked at me, the possessiveness in his touch, the intensity of his focus. Jess's words echo in my mind. Men like that don't take no for an answer, and a chill runs down my spine despite the warmth of the apartment. I stand and move to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, watching rain streak down and blur the Brooklyn street below. My bookstore sign glows in the darkness. Barrett's books in warm gold letters, the dream my parents left me, and the anchor that keeps me grounded. This is my life, I tell myself. Books, and quiet, and safety, and ordinary happiness. Not roses and danger, and a man whose world operates by rules I do not understand and cannot survive. I delete our text thread next, hundreds of messages that I cannot bear to read. Conversations that felt intimate and real and now seem like evidence of my own foolishness. Good morning, beautiful. And what are you reading today? And I cannot stop thinking about the way you laugh. All gone, disappeared into digital nothing, and I feel simultaneously lighter and more hollow. Hemingway meows and whines around my ankles, and I pick him up, burying my face in his fur, breathing in the familiar smell of cat and home and normalcy. This is enough, I tell myself. This has to be enough. The rain intensifies outside, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency, and I carry my wine back to the couch, curling up with a book I have read 100 times because new stories require attention I cannot give right now. The apartment settles into familiar nighttime sounds, the building creaking, the radiator hissing, the distant sound of traffic. I am safe here, I think. I am safe and alone, and that is better than being endangered and wanted. I almost believe it. The 3 knocks come at exactly midnight, deliberate and measured, echoing through my apartment with a finality that makes my heart stop and my blood run cold, because I know with absolute certainty who is standing on the other side of my door, even though it should be impossible, even though I blocked his number less than 2 hours ago, and there is no way he could have gotten here this fast unless he was already coming, already on his way before I made my choice. The book falls from my hands, and Hemingway's head jerks up, ears flattening against his skull as a low hiss builds in his throat. And I sit frozen on my couch as the knocks fade into silence that feels heavier than sound. My apartment suddenly feels smaller, the walls pressing in, and I can feel him on the other side of the door like a change in air pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks and transforms everything. I should not answer it. Every instinct for self-preservation screams at me to stay exactly where I am, to call the police, to pretend I am not home even though we both know I am here, even though the lights blazing in every window announce my presence like a beacon. But my body moves without consulting my brain, rising from the couch on legs that feel disconnected from the rest of me, walking across the worn wooden floors toward the door as if pulled by invisible strings. My phone is clutched in my hand, 911 already half-typed on the screen, finger hovering over the call button as I approach the peephole with my heart hammering so hard I can hear it in my ears, can feel it pulsing in my throat. I lean forward and press my eye to the small circle of glass, and the breath leaves my body in a rush because Dominic Kane is standing in my hallway and he looks nothing like the composed, immaculate man who has filled my thoughts for 3 weeks. His expensive coat is soaked through, water dripping onto the worn carpet of the hallway and creating a dark pool at his feet. His dark hair plastered to his forehead in wet strands that make him look younger and somehow more dangerous. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the hallway flickers, casting shadows across his face that turn his features sharp and predatory, but it is his eyes that freeze me in place. Those dark eyes are staring directly at the peephole, directly at where I am watching him, as if he can see through the door and into my soul, as if the solid wood between us is nothing but air. His jaw is tight, muscle jumping beneath the skin, and there is an emotion in his face I have never seen before, something raw and barely controlled that makes him look like a man standing on the edge of something terrible. I back away from the door, my breath coming in short gasps, phone still clutched in my hand like a talisman against the storm that has arrived at my threshold. He has not knocked again. He is just standing there, waiting, his presence so commanding that I can feel it through the barrier of wood and locks and all my carefully constructed defenses. The rain intensifies outside, drumming against my windows with increasing violence, and Hemingway has retreated under the couch, still hissing his displeasure at this intruder who has brought danger to our sanctuary. I should call the police. I should scream for Mrs. Chen next door, or Mr. Rodriguez across the hall, or any of my neighbors who might hear and come to investigate. But what would I tell them? That a man is standing outside my door, not threatening me, not breaking in, just standing there soaked to the bone in the middle of the night? That I blocked his number, and now he has come to my home, and I am terrified not of what he might do, but of what I might do if I open this door. His voice comes through the wood, low and controlled, but with something underneath it that sounds like barely leashed desperation, and it wraps around me like smoke, filling the apartment and making it impossible to think clearly. I know you are watching me, Olivia. The sound of my name in his mouth still does things to my nervous system that I wish it would not, still makes warmth pool low in my belly, despite my fear, despite everything. I felt the exact moment you blocked me, he says, and there is something in his tone that makes me believe him, something that suggests the blocking was not just a digital disconnection, but a physical pain he experienced miles away. Like something tearing, he continues, and I press my hand against the door as if I can feel him through it, as if the wood between us is conducting electricity. The silence stretches and I hold my breath, waiting for anger or demands or the threats that men like him supposedly make when they do not get what they want. But when he speaks again, his voice is quieter, almost gentle, and somehow that is more terrifying than rage would be. I am not leaving until you talk to me. I will stand here all night if I have to. I have done worse for less important things. The casual admission sends ice through my veins because it confirms everything I learned, everything I feared, everything that made me block his number in the first place. He has done worse things. He is capable of worse things. This beautiful man with his old-fashioned courtship and his gentle hands has done things I cannot imagine and probably would not survive knowing. But then his voice drops to almost a whisper, so quiet I have to press my ear against the door to hear it, and what he says next destroys every defense I have carefully constructed. And you are the most important thing there is, not the most important person. The most important thing. As if I have transcended humanity in his mind and become something else entirely, something precious and essential and worth standing in a hallway at midnight in a soaking coat for. I slide down to sit with my back against the door, phone falling from my nerveless fingers to the floor beside me, and I press both palms flat against the wood as if I can reach through it to touch him. This is insane. This whole situation is insane. 3 weeks ago, I did not know Dominic Kane existed, and now he is camped outside my door in the middle of the night, refusing to leave, claiming I am the most important thing in his world, and I am sitting on my floor fighting the overwhelming urge to unlock the door and let him in. The rain sounds like bullets against the windows now, the storm reaching its peak, and I wonder if he is cold out there in his wet coat, if he is uncomfortable, if any part of him regrets coming here like this. But I know the answer. Men like Dominic Kane do not do things they regret. They do not second guess or hesitate or doubt. They decide and they act, and the world rearranges itself around their decisions. I decided to block him, and he decided to come here, and now we are at an impasse with nothing but a door and all my fear between us. The hallway must be freezing, the building's ancient heating system never quite reaching the upper floors adequately, and I picture him standing there in his wet clothes, water still dripping, that fluorescent light still flickering overhead like a dying star. How did he even get in the building? The front door is supposed to be locked after 9, residents only, but of course that would not stop him. Nothing stops him. That is part of what makes him so terrifying and so magnetic all at once. I hear movement on the other side of the door, fabric rustling, and I hold my breath wondering if he is leaving, if my silence has finally convinced him that I meant what I did when I blocked his number. But then I hear something else, a soft sliding sound, and I realize with a jolt that goes through me like lightning that he has sat down too. We are mirroring each other, separated by nothing but 2 inches of wood and everything that makes us impossible. The thought makes me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Here we are, a bookstore owner and a mafia boss, sitting on opposite sides of a door at midnight while rain tries to beat down the building around us. It is absurd and romantic and terrifying, and I do not know what to do with any of it. Hemingway eventually creeps out from under the couch, his fear overcome by curiosity, and he approaches the door with his tail puffed up to twice its normal size. He sniffs at the crack beneath the door where I can see the shadow of Dominic's presence blocking the hallway light, and then he does something unexpected. He sits down and meows, not his angry hiss, but his plaintive, "I want something" meow, and I wonder if somehow even my cat has fallen under Dominic's spell. "Traitor," I whisper to Hemingway, but there is no heat in it, because I am the biggest traitor of all, sitting here pressed against this door when I should be calling for help, or shouting at him to leave, or doing any of the 1,000 things a sensible woman would do when a dangerous man appears at her home uninvited. But I am not sensible anymore. I have not been sensible since the moment I turned around on that ladder and saw him standing in my bookstore like every dangerous fantasy I never knew I had. The building settles around us, old pipes groaning, the couple upstairs arguing in muffled voices that drift down through thin ceilings, the bass from someone's music thumping a distant rhythm that counterpoints the rain. Normal sounds of normal life continuing while my world balances on the edge of a decision I am terrified to make. I could sit here all night. He said he would stand there all night, but I could sit here just as long, both of us stubborn and stupid and unwilling to be the first to break. But that is a lie I am telling myself, because I know I will break first. I can already feel myself breaking, already feel the cracks spreading through my resolve like ice fracturing under pressure. My hand reaches up without permission and touches the doorknob, cold metal against my palm, and I do not turn it, but I do not pull away either. On the other side of the door, I hear his breathing change, as if he can sense my hand on the knob, as if we are connected by more than just proximity and poor decisions. The lock would be so easy to turn. One movement and the door swings open, and he is here in my space and everything changes again. But I cannot do it. Not yet. Not until I understand what I am inviting in. Not until I know whether opening this door means opening myself to something beautiful or something that will destroy me completely. The rain continues its assault, and the building creaks, its old bones protest, and somewhere in the distance a siren wails, and we sit on opposite sides of my door. At midnight, two people who barely know each other but cannot seem to let go, waiting to see who will surrender first to whatever this is between us that feels like gravity and fire and fate all twisted together into something neither of us can control. My phone screen has gone dark on the floor beside me. The emergency call I almost made now just a black mirror reflecting nothing, and I lean my head back against the door and close my eyes and try to breathe through the chaos in my chest. He is still there. I can feel him still there. And God help me, part of me never wants him to leave. 15 minutes pass in silence, so complete I can hear my own heartbeat and the rain against the windows and the soft sound of Dominic breathing on the other side of the door. And I'm beginning to think we might actually sit here until dawn when I hear another door open in the hallway, the distinctive creak of Mrs. Chen's apartment that I have heard 1,000 times before, but never with such a sense of impending disaster. Mrs. Chen is 78 years old, a tiny Chinese woman who has lived in this building for 40 years and treats me like the granddaughter she never had, bringing me soup when I am sick and scolding me when I work too late, and generally watching over me with a fierce protectiveness that I have cherished since my parents died. The last thing I want is for her to get involved in whatever this is, to be exposed to the danger that follows Dominic Kane like a shadow. But I hear her shuffling steps in the hallway, and her voice, sharp with suspicion and concern, demanding to know what is going on out here at this hour. I press my ear harder against the door, holding my breath, and I hear Dominic stand up, hear the rustle of his wet coat and the slight groan of his joints, and then I hear his voice transform into something I have never heard before. He speaks to Mrs. Chen with a courtesy and charm that is somehow both genuine and carefully deployed, his tone respectful and warm, and I can picture him probably giving her one of those devastating smiles that makes people forget to be afraid. "I am so sorry to disturb you, ma'am," he says, and there is no threat in his voice, no edge, just a man who sounds tired and worried and entirely non-threatening. "I am just hoping to speak with Olivia, to apologize for upsetting her. I did not mean to cause a disturbance." Through the door I hear Mrs. Chen's suspicious humph, the sound she makes when she is not quite buying what someone is selling but is willing to hear them out. And she asks who he is and what he wants and why he is standing in the hallway dripping all over the carpet at midnight. Dominic's response is perfect, pitched exactly right to reassure without dismissing her concerns. "My name is Dominic," he says. "I am Olivia's boyfriend. Or I was. And I made a mistake that hurt her, and I just want the chance to apologize properly. I know the hour is late, and I apologize for that too, but when you realize you have hurt someone you care about, waiting until morning seems impossible." I can hear the smile in his voice, can imagine him deploying that lethal charm, and despite everything I feel a flash of irritation because he is lying. We are not boyfriend and girlfriend, 3 weeks does not make us anything official, but the lie serves its purpose. Mrs. Chen's tone softens slightly, enough that I know he is winning her over, and she says something about young love and foolish men, and how her late husband once stood outside her window in the rain for 3 hours before she forgave him. Then her voice sharpens again and she says she is going to check on me, make sure I am all right, because a man standing in a hallway at midnight is not normal no matter how charming he is. I hear her knock on my door, 3 sharp raps that are nothing like Dominic's measured knocks, and her voice calls out, "Livy, honey, are you okay in there? Do you want me to call the police?" I close my eyes and rest my forehead against the door, because this is it. This is the moment where I either expose Dominic for what he is and bring the authorities into this mess, or I protect him and myself and try to handle this alone. The choice should be easy, but it is not easy at all because calling the police means questions and reports and attention that might put Mrs. Chen in danger, might make her a witness to something she should not witness, might paint a target on her back the way one seems to have been painted on mine. I take a shaky breath and call back through the door, my voice steadier than I feel. No, Mrs. Chen, thank you. I can handle this. There is a pause, a long moment where I can feel her weighing my words against her concern, and then she says in Mandarin, which she knows I understand from the lessons she has given me over the years. Be careful, little one. Some flowers have thorns that draw blood. I swallow hard against the lump in my throat because she is right. She is so right. But I say back in halting Mandarin, I know, Auntie. I will be careful. I hear Dominic speak again, his voice carrying that same respectful warmth, and he says, I appreciate you looking out for her, Mrs. Chen. She deserves that. She deserves people who care whether she is safe. The words hit me hard because they are true, and because he sounds like he means them. This dangerous man acknowledging that I deserve protection, even as he stands outside my door in the middle of the night refusing to leave. Mrs. Chen makes another sound, but I can hear she is mollified, at least partially, and she says something about how he had better not hurt me or he will answer to her, and despite the terror and confusion swirling in my chest, I almost smile because Mrs. Chen threatening a mafia boss is perhaps the most absurd thing about this entire absurd night. I hear her door close, but not all the way, left slightly ajar, and I know she is standing there listening, watching, ready to intervene if needed, and the knowledge that I have a witness is both comforting and terrifying. Now I have no choice. I cannot leave Dominic standing in the hallway with Mrs. Chen listening because that creates a scene, creates a tension, creates exactly the kind of situation that I was trying to avoid by blocking his number in the first place. My hands shake as I reach for the locks, and I hear Dominic go still on the other side of the door, hear his breathing stop as if he is afraid to hope. I turn the deadbolt with a click that sounds too loud, then the regular lock. But I leave the chain on, that flimsy barrier that would not stop him for even a second if he wanted to force his way in, but that gives me the illusion of control. I open the door the few inches the chain allows, and peer through the gap, and the air leaves my lungs in a rush, because seeing him through the peephole was nothing compared to seeing him like this, up close, real, devastating. His eyes lock onto mine with an intensity that feels physical, as if he is reaching through the gap and wrapping his hands around my heart, and I can see every detail I could not see through the peephole. He is not just wet, he is soaked to the bone, his expensive coat heavy with rain, his hair dripping water that runs down his face and neck, and there are shadows under his eyes that suggest he has not slept. Exhaustion written into every line of his face. But it is the desperation I see there that undoes me. A kind of raw need that I have never associated with Dominic Kane, this man who always seemed so controlled, so sure, so utterly unshakable. He looks shaken, now. He looks like a man standing on the edge of something he cannot control and does not know how to fix. Water pools at his feet, soaking into the worn carpet, and the fluorescent light overhead flickers again, casting his face in alternating brightness and shadow that makes him look almost haunted. Mrs. Chen's door is still cracked open, and I can feel her presence like a pressure at my back, a reminder that this conversation has witnesses, that I am not entirely alone with him, even though it feels like the rest of the world has disappeared. My anger, carefully banked during the last hour, flares hot and bright, and I grip the edge of the door hard enough that my knuckles go white. You cannot just show up here, I say, and my voice shakes with fury and fear, and something else I do not want to name. I blocked you for a reason. His jaw tightens, muscle jumping beneath skin, and he does not try to charm me the way he charmed Mrs. Chen, does not smile or deflect or play games. His voice when he speaks is rough, scraped raw, and he says, "Then tell me that reason to my face. You owe me that much." The presumption of it, the audacity, makes my anger burn hotter, and I say through gritted teeth, "I do not owe you anything. We barely know each other." The words are meant to wound, to create distance, to remind both of us that 3 weeks is nothing in the grand scheme of things, that whatever we had was too brief and too intense to be real. But the moment they leave my mouth, I see them land like physical blows, see something flash across his face that looks like pain, and his hands curl into fists at his sides, as if he is physically restraining himself from reaching for me. "Don't," he says, and the single word cracks like a whip, sharp and commanding and desperate all at once. Don't pretend these 3 weeks meant nothing. His eyes bore into mine, and I cannot look away, cannot break the connection even though I desperately want to. "I have known you every day for 3 weeks," he continues, voice low and intense, "and that is more real than relationships I have watched people build over years." The statement hangs in the air between us. Too honest, too raw, too much truth for this narrow gap in my doorway. I want to argue, to tell him he is wrong, that time matters and 3 weeks is nothing, and he is delusional if he thinks otherwise. But the words stick in my throat because some part of me, some traitorous part, agrees with him. These 3 weeks have felt more real, more intense, more world-shaking than anything I have experienced before. Every conversation, every touch, every look has been saturated with meaning and possibility. And even now, even knowing what he is and what he is capable of, I cannot pretend it meant nothing. But I cannot admit that either, cannot give him that power over me, so I just stare at him through the gap and try to breathe through the chaos in my chest. Behind me, I hear Hemingway meow, probably wondering why the door is open, but the interesting person is not being allowed in, and the normalcy of it, the absolute mundane reality of my cat being curious, creates a surreal contrast to the intensity of this moment. Dominic's gaze flicks past me into the apartment, taking in what he can see through the narrow opening, and something in his expression softens slightly when he hears Hemingway. "You named him Hemingway," he says, and it is not a question. And I realize I must have told him about my cat during one of our many conversations, must have mentioned my habit of naming pets after authors. The fact that he remembers, that this small detail stuck in his mind, makes my chest tight. His coat drips steadily, creating a larger pool of water, and I notice for the first time that he is shivering slightly, probably cold down to his bones, and I have to fight the urge to invite him in, to offer him a towel and dry clothes and warmth. But that way lies disaster. I know it, can feel it in the way my body responds to his presence, the way every cell seems to lean toward him despite my brain's screaming warnings. The hallway is silent, except for the rain and our breathing, and the distant sound of Mrs. Chen shifting position behind her barely closed door. And I realize we cannot stand here forever, cannot maintain this stalemate indefinitely. Something has to give, someone has to surrender, and I am terrified it is going to be me. I close the door enough to unhook the chain, my hands moving before my mind fully approves the decision, and then I open it again, but I do not step aside to let him in. Instead, I say in a voice that sounds stronger than I feel, "We can talk, but you are not coming inside." He nods once, sharp and controlled, as if he expected nothing else, as if he is grateful for even this small concession, and I watch as he moves to sit down against the hallway wall, his back sliding down the faded wallpaper until he is sitting on the floor with his knees drawn up and his head dropping forward into his hands. The posture is so unlike him, so completely contrary to every controlled, powerful stance I have seen him take, that for a moment I just stare, unable to process this version of Dominic Kane who looks broken and human and utterly defeated. I lower myself to sit on my side of the threshold, mirroring his position with the doorframe between us, and I press my hand flat against the wood of the doorframe as if I could feel him through it, as if the barrier between us is thinner than it appears. Mrs. Chen's door is still cracked, and I can see the faint glow of her lamp. No, she is still listening, still watching over me even though I have told her I am fine, and somehow her presence makes this easier, knowing I am not entirely alone with whatever Dominic is about to tell me. The rain has become a downpour, absolutely hammering against the building now, and water runs down the single window at the end of the hallway, creating rivers of light and shadow that shift and change. It is past 12:30 in the morning and the building is mostly quiet, just the occasional footstep from the apartment above. The distant sound of a television, the normal soundtrack of people living their lives, while mine splinters into something I cannot recognize. Dominic does not look up from his hands when he starts speaking, his voice rough and low and scraped raw with emotion that I have never heard from him before. Her name is Sophia, he says, and the name comes out like a prayer or a curse or both. She is 19. She is the only good thing my family ever produced, and she is on an operating table right now because someone decided to send me a message by running her car off the road. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, and I press my hand harder against the doorframe as if I need the solid wood to anchor me to reality. A car accident. His sister, 19 years old, on an operating table. Because of him, because of his world, because of the violence that follows him like a curse. This is exactly what I feared, exactly why I blocked his number, the concrete proof that loving Dominic Kane means becoming a target, means living in a world where innocent people get hurt to send messages, where a teenage girl ends up in surgery because of her brother's sins. But even as my mind catalogues all the reasons this proves I was right to push him away, my heart is breaking for the pain in his voice, for the way his shoulders shake slightly, as if he is holding himself together through sheer force of will. I should stay silent, should let him say what he came to say, and then close the door and lock it, and call him a cab, and go back to my safe, predictable life. But I cannot, the words coming out before I can stop them, soft and aching. Why did you not just call me? Why show up like this? He laughs, a bitter sound with no humor in it, and finally raises his head to look at me through the open doorway, and the devastation in his dark eyes makes tears spring to mine. You blocked me, he says simply, as if that explains everything, and I suppose it does. And I needed to see your face. His voice cracks on the last word and he stops, swallowing hard, struggling for control. I needed something real in the middle of all this blood and consequences. The admission is so raw, so honest, that I feel it in my chest like a physical ache, and the tears that have been threatening finally spill over and run hot down my cheeks. I wipe at them angrily because I should not be crying, should not be feeling this overwhelming sympathy for a man whose life just put a teenage girl in the hospital, but I cannot help it because despite everything, despite all the danger and darkness, what I see in Dominic's face right now is genuine grief and terror and love for his sister. This could be manipulation, some cold strategic play to get me to soften toward him, to use his sister's accident as leverage to work his way back into my life. But nothing about the way he looks right now suggests calculation. This is a man coming apart at the seams, barely holding himself together, and every instinct I have says his pain is real, his fear is real, his desperation is devastatingly real. The silence stretches between us, filled only with rain and breathing and the weight of everything unspoken. And then Dominic speaks again, his voice barely above a whisper. She read every book you recommended. The statement seems to come from nowhere, but it lands with the force of revelation. And I remember the afternoon he came into the bookstore and asked what I thought a 19-year-old girl would like. How I had made him a list of titles ranging from classics to contemporary fiction. How his face had softened when he said it was for his sister. I had not thought about it again, had assumed it was just conversation, but apparently he had bought those books. Apparently Sophia had read them. Apparently I had touched her life in some small way without even knowing it. Before the anesthesia, Dominic continues, his voice breaking completely now. The last thing she said was, "Bring Olivia. She will know what to say." He presses the heels of his hands against his eyes, as if he can physically hold back tears. "But I do not even know if you will come." The words shatter something in my chest, cracking through all my careful defenses and exposing the soft, vulnerable parts I have been trying to protect. This girl I have never met, This 19-year-old who is the only good thing Dominic's family ever produced, asked for me in what might have been her last conscious moments. Not her brother alone, but me, the bookstore girl who makes him smile, the stranger who recommended books without knowing they would matter. How can I say no to that? How can I maintain my boundaries and my safety and my carefully constructed walls when a teenager on an operating table thinks I might know what to say? I lean my head back against the doorframe and let the tears come, not bothering to wipe them away anymore, and I can hear Dominic's ragged breathing from the hallway, can feel the weight of his grief pressing against me through the open door. Hemingway appears beside me, rubbing against my leg and purring, oblivious to the emotional devastation happening around him, and I reach down to stroke his fur with my free hand while keeping the other pressed to the doorframe, maintaining that connection to Dominic even through the barrier. From Mrs. Chen's apartment, I hear a soft sound, maybe a sigh, or maybe just the settling of an old woman who has seen too much of life to be surprised by young people's drama. But her door stays cracked, her vigil continuing. The building creaks and groans around us, the rain still pounding, and somewhere above us, someone drops something heavy that makes the ceiling shake. Normal life continuing while mine transforms into something I do not recognize. I think about Sophia, 19 and on an operating table, her body broken by violence meant for her brother. I think about the books she read because I recommended them, about how she asked for me in her fear and pain, about how she thinks I might know what to say even though I am just a bookstore owner who met her brother 3 weeks ago and fell too fast and too hard for a man I should have run from. I think about Dominic sitting in the hallway soaked to the bone, shivering with cold or emotion or both, waiting to see if I will show him compassion or send him away. I think about the choice I am being forced to make between safety and humanity, between protecting myself and helping a girl who did nothing wrong except be related to the wrong man. My voice when I finally speak is thick with tears but steady, and I say through the doorway, "Tell me about her. Not about the accident, not about the surgery, just tell me about Sophia. I need to know who I am doing this for." Dominic's head jerks up and he stares at me as if I have offered him salvation, hope sparking in his devastated eyes. And he says, "You will come?" "I have not said that yet," I reply, "but I need to understand. I need to know her." So he tells me. He tells me about raising her after their parents died when she was 13 and he was 26, barely more than a kid himself, but suddenly responsible for a teenage girl in the middle of grief and chaos. He tells me about her love of reading, how she devours books like other people breathe, how their apartment has more books than furniture because he cannot say no when she asks for just one more. He tells me about her plans to study English literature at Columbia in the fall, about her dream of becoming a teacher, about how she volunteers at a literacy program in the Bronx every Saturday. He tells me about her laugh, infectious and bright, about how she makes terrible puns that somehow always make him smile, about how she is the only person who can talk him down when his temper flares. He tells me about the way she still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit she has had since she was 5, about her terrible singing voice that she uses anyway, about her kindness to everyone she meets, even when they do not deserve it. He tells me about his sister, and with every word I can hear the love and pride and terror, can hear how much she means to him, how she is not just family, but purpose and redemption and hope, all wrapped into one 19-year-old girl who never asked to be born into a world of blood and violence. And as he talks, I feel my resolve crumbling, feel my anger dissolving into something more complicated, a tangle of sympathy and fear and reluctant admiration for this man, who has apparently built his entire world around protecting one good thing in the middle of darkness. The door between us feels both insurmountable and paper-thin, a barrier that represents everything I am afraid of and everything I am being called to cross. When he finally stops talking, his voice is hoarse and his eyes are red and he looks at me with an expression that holds no expectation, no demand, just raw hope that I might say yes, that I might come with him to a hospital and meet a girl who asked for me, that I might step across this threshold and into his world knowing full well the danger that waits there. And God help me, I know I am going to say yes. I stand up, my legs shaky beneath me, and I say the words that I know will change everything, even as I try to convince myself they will not. I will come to the hospital, but I need you to understand. I am coming for her, not for you. The distinction feels important, necessary, a line I need to draw to maintain some semblance of control over a situation that is rapidly spiraling beyond my grasp. Dominic rises from the floor in one fluid motion despite his exhaustion, and he looks at me with such raw honesty that I have to look away from the intensity of it. I know, he says quietly, but I will take what I can get. The admission is humble and grateful, and somehow makes this worse because it would be easier if he were demanding or manipulative, or anything other than this broken man who is accepting whatever scraps of compassion I am willing to offer. I turn away before I can change my mind, before I can think too hard about what I am doing, and I grab my coat from the hook by the door, shoving my arms into sleeves with hands that shake so badly I can barely manage the simple task. My phone goes into my pocket, my keys, my wallet, the automatic movements of leaving my apartment that I have done thousands of times, but which feel momentous and irreversible tonight. Hemingway winds around my ankles, meowing his confusion at this late-night departure, and I scoop him up and carry him to Mrs. Chen's door, knocking softly. She opens immediately, because of course she has been standing there listening to everything, and her eyes go from me to Dominic and back again, reading the situation with the uncanny accuracy of someone who has lived long enough to recognize trouble when she sees it. I need you to watch Hemingway, I tell her, and my voice wavers despite my best efforts. I have to go out for a while. Mrs. Chen takes the cat from my arms and studies my face with concern etched deep in the lines around her eyes. You do not have to go anywhere with him, she says quietly in Mandarin, and I know she means it, know she would call the police or hide me in her apartment, or do whatever needed to keep me safe. But I shake my head and switch to English so Dominic can understand. His sister was in an accident. She is in surgery. I am just going to the hospital. Mrs. Chen's expression shifts from suspicion to sympathy, because family and duty are things she understands in her bones, and she nods once and says, "Be safe, little one. Come home safe." I promise I will try, and then I am turning away and walking toward Dominic, who has stayed back, giving me space, not crowding or pressuring, just waiting with a patience that must be costing him. Everything given the urgency screaming through his body language. We move toward the stairs, his footsteps controlled but quick, and I have to hurry to keep up as we descend the 3 flights to the ground floor. He stays 2 steps ahead of me the entire time, moving with an urgency that is barely leashed, but every few seconds he glances back over his shoulder as if to confirm I am still there, as if afraid I will disappear or change my mind or vanish like smoke. The front door of the building opens onto a street slick with rain, puddles reflecting the neon signs of the bodega across the way, and the streetlights that cast everything in sodium orange. A black Mercedes is idling at the curb, water streaming off its polished surface, and a man in a dark suit stands beside the back door holding an umbrella. Dominic's driver, I assume, and the umbrella he holds out is clearly meant for me because Dominic is already soaked beyond saving. I duck under it, and the driver opens the car door, his face professionally blank, and I slide into the back seat onto leather that is soft and expensive and smells faintly of cologne and something else, something metallic that might be fear or might be my imagination. Dominic goes around to the other side and gets in, and we sit at opposite ends of the back seat, as far apart as the space allows, the privacy partition between us and the driver creating a bubble of intimacy that I am not ready for. The driver pulls away from the curb smoothly, navigating the rain-slicked streets with practiced ease, and the city blurs past the windows, lights smearing into abstract patterns. Inside the car, it is warm and quiet, except for the sound of rain drumming on the roof and the swish of tires through water, and I press myself against the door and try to breathe normally, even though my heart is racing and my mind is screaming that I am making a terrible mistake. Dominic's phone starts ringing before we have gone 2 blocks. The sound shrill and intrusive, and he pulls it from his pocket and looks at the screen, and his entire body goes rigid. He answers in Italian, his voice clipped and hard, and even though I cannot understand the words, I can hear the authority in his tone, the shift from vulnerable brother to something else entirely, something cold and commanding and dangerous. He speaks rapidly, his free hand clenched into a fist on his thigh, and I catch fragments that sound like names, Marchetti among them, and words that might be orders or might be threats. The conversation is brief and intense, and when he hangs up, another call comes through immediately, then another, his phone lighting up with what must be a dozen contacts, all trying to reach him at once. He takes the calls one after another, his voice getting harder with each conversation. And I watch him transform in real time from the broken man who sat in my hallway to someone I barely recognize. Someone who commands and controls and makes decisions that I suspect involve violence and retribution. On one call, he switches fully into Italian, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, and he speaks for several minutes in tones that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, even though I cannot understand him. When he finally ends that call, he does not immediately take the next one. Instead, he sits with the phone in his hand and stares at it as if it contains answers to questions he has not asked. The driver's voice comes through a small speaker near the partition, startling me. "Mr. Kane, do you want me to translate for Miss Barrett? I think she should understand." Dominic's head snaps up, and he looks at me as if he had forgotten I was there, and something flickers across his face that might be shame or regret. Then he nods once and says, "Yes, tell her." The driver, still navigating through rain and traffic with easy competence, says over his shoulder in a voice that is professionally neutral, "Mr. Kane just told his people that there will be no retaliation until he gives the word. That, Sophia, comes first. Everything else can wait." The words land in the quiet car with the weight of revelation, and I stare at Dominic, who is staring out the window as if he cannot bear to meet my eyes. Everything else can wait. Retaliation. The Marchetti family. War. These are the words floating in the air between us, confirming everything I feared about his world, about the violence that simmers just beneath the surface of his expensive suits and charming smile. But there is something else too, something in the way he put his sister first, the way he told his people to stand down, to wait, to let business and vengeance take a back seat to family. The driver speaks again, unprompted, and there is something in his tone that sounds almost like wonder. "I have worked for Mr. Kane for 8 years, he says, and I can see his eyes find mine in the rearview mirror. I have never heard him say anyone comes before business. Not once. The statement hangs in the air, and I do not know what to do with it. Do not know how to reconcile the man who orders retaliation and speaks of war with the man who is putting his sister's surgery above everything else in his world." Dominic finally looks at me then, and in his eyes I see exhaustion and grief and something else, something that might be an apology for dragging me into this, for letting me see this part of him, for being exactly what I was afraid he was. But he does not apologize out loud, does not try to explain or justify or minimize. He just looks at me with those dark eyes that have haunted my dreams for 3 weeks and says nothing at all. The city continues to blur past, Brooklyn giving way to Manhattan, the rain showing no signs of stopping. We cross the bridge, and I watch the East River churn below us, dark and dangerous and reflecting nothing. The hospital is in Midtown, the driver informs us, Mount Sinai, and we should be there in 15 minutes if traffic cooperates. 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes to prepare myself for walking into Dominic's world fully, for meeting his sister, for becoming part of a story that I should have stayed far away from. My hands are clenched in my lap, knuckles white with tension, and I make myself relax them, make myself breathe, make myself remember that I am doing this for a 19-year-old girl who asked for me, not for the man sitting across from me who represents everything I should fear. But I am lying to myself and I know it. I am doing this for Sophia, yes, but I am also doing this for Dominic, for the broken way he looked sitting in my hallway, for the love I heard in his voice when he talked about his sister, for the man beneath the monster who might be worth saving or might destroy me in the attempt. Another call comes through and Dominic looks at the screen and closes his eyes briefly as if gathering strength, then answers. This conversation is in English, thankfully, and I hear him say, "I do not care what Marchetti is saying. I do not care what moves he is making. You hold the line until I get there and assess the situation myself." There is a pause while whoever is on the other end argues, and Dominic's voice drops to lethal calm. I said hold. If anyone acts without my explicit orders, they answer to me personally. Do I make myself clear? Another pause, shorter this time, and then he says, "Good," and ends the call. He looks at me, and I see him weighing what to say, how much to reveal, whether to try to shield me from the reality of what he is, or to let me see it all and hope I do not run. I make the choice for him. The Marchetti family, I say, and it is not a question. They did this to Sophia. He nods slowly, his jaw tight. They sent a message. I was supposed to receive it and react predictably. Instead, I am here, with you. The implication being that his presence with me, his choice to come to my apartment instead of immediately orchestrating retaliation, is itself a deviation from how he is supposed to behave, from what his world expects of him. And that deviation is dangerous, I realize, not just for him, but for everyone in his orbit, including me. What happens when you do give the word? I ask, because I need to know, need to understand what I am stepping into. He looks at me for a long moment, and I see him decide to tell me the truth. War, he says simply, real war. Blood and bodies and consequences that will ripple through the city for months, unless I find another way. Is there another way? I do not know yet, he admits, and the honesty is almost worse than a lie would be. But I will find one if I can. For Sophia. For you. The inclusion of me in that statement makes my breath catch because I did not ask to be part of his calculations, did not ask to be someone he considers when making decisions about violence and peace. But here I am anyway, sitting in his car, going to his sister's bedside, already tangled in his world whether I want to be or not. The hospital looms ahead, a massive building blazing with lights against the dark, rainy sky, and I feel my stomach drop because this is real now. This is happening. There is no more time to second guess or reconsider. The Mercedes pulls up to the emergency entrance, and the driver gets out to open my door, umbrella already deployed, and I step out into the rain-slicked night and smell the city and the hospital and fear. Dominic is beside me in an instant, not touching but close enough that I can feel the heat of him, and we walk through the automatic doors into fluorescent brightness and antiseptic air, and I know that nothing will ever be the same again. The hospital waiting room is sterile and bright, fluorescent lights humming overhead with an intensity that feels punishing at 2 a.m, and the first thing I notice is the men. They are everywhere, stationed at doorways and clustered in corners, all wearing dark suits that do nothing to hide the bulges of weapons beneath their jackets, all watching Dominic with a deference that borders on fear. These are his people, I realize with a chill that goes bone deep, his soldiers or guards or whatever term applies to men who carry guns and follow orders from a crime boss. They watch us enter with expressions carefully blank, but I see their eyes tracking me, assessing, wondering who I am and what I mean to their boss, and whether I represent a threat or a weakness. The regular families in the waiting room, people here for their own emergencies and tragedies, have pressed themselves into the far corners, giving Dominic's men a wide berth, their faces showing the universal human instinct to stay away from predators. A nurse at the desk looks up when we approach, and I see fear flicker across her face before she masks it with professional courtesy. And when Dominic asks about Sophia Kane, the nurse's hands shake slightly as she checks her computer. Still in surgery, she says, her voice carefully neutral. The doctor will come out with updates when there are updates. I can show you to the private waiting room. Private waiting room, of course there is a private waiting room, because men like Dominic Kane do not sit in public spaces with ordinary people waiting for news about their loved ones. The nurse leads us down a corridor, past exam rooms and supply closets and the soft beeping of monitors, and I notice how doctors and other nurses avert their eyes when Dominic passes, how they suddenly find urgent business elsewhere, how his presence clears the hallway like a parting sea. The private waiting room is smaller than the main area, but more comfortable, with actual furniture instead of plastic chairs, a coffee machine in the corner, magazines on a low table that look recent rather than years old. The nurse tells us someone will come get us as soon as there is news, and she leaves quickly, almost fleeing. And then it is just Dominic and me and the two bodyguards who followed us into the room and position themselves by the door, like sentries. Dominic stands in the center of the room looking lost, and I watch as the adrenaline and urgency that carried him this far suddenly drains away, leaving him hollow and shaking. He moves to one of the chairs and sits down heavily, elbows on his knees, head dropping into his hands, and the veneer of control that he has maintained through the car ride and the hospital entrance completely shatters. His shoulders shake, and I hear a sound escape him that might be a sob, or might be something deeper, the sound of a man breaking apart under pressure too great to bear. I stand frozen by the door, uncertain what to do, part of me wanting to maintain the distance I promised myself, the boundaries I said I would keep. But seeing him like this, seeing the raw grief and terror radiating off him in waves, makes it impossible to stay detached. I cross the room slowly, each step feeling momentous, and I lower myself into the chair beside him. For a long moment, I just sit there, hands clasped in my lap, staring at the terrible abstract art on the opposite wall, listening to Dominic's ragged breathing and the hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant sounds of the hospital continuing its work. Then, before I can think better of it, before I can talk myself out of it, I reach over and take his hand. His fingers close around mine immediately, desperately, like I am the only thing keeping him tethered to earth, and his grip is almost painful in its intensity. I regret the gesture instantly because it feels too intimate, too much like crossing a line I swore I would not cross, but I do not pull away. I cannot pull away, not when he is holding on like I am a lifeline and he is drowning. From their position by the door, the bodyguards are watching this interaction with expressions that would be comical if the situation were not so dire. Their faces show visible shock, eyebrows raised, glances exchanged, and I realize they have never seen their boss like this, vulnerable and breaking and human. One of them, a man with silver at his temples and scars on his knuckles, catches my eye and gives me the smallest nod, something that might be approval or might be acknowledgement or might be warning. I cannot tell. Dominic's voice when he finally speaks is muffled by his hands, rough and thick with emotion. I have kept her away from everything, he says. She does not know half of what I do. She thinks I am just in import/export. The words come out with a bitter laugh that has no humor in it. God, she is so naive. So good. I squeeze his hand gently and say, she knows you love her. That is what matters. He raises his head then and looks at me, and his eyes are red, and his face is haggard, and he has never looked more beautiful or more broken. 3 weeks ago, he says, and his voice has shifted to something softer, something wondering. I walked into your bookstore looking for a first edition Hemingway. The abrupt change in topic throws me, but I do not interrupt. Just listen as he continues. You were standing on a ladder, and you nearly fell when you saw me. You blushed. His thumb moves across my knuckles, a gentle, unconscious gesture. I have not been able to stop thinking about that blush. The intimacy of the statement, the softness of his voice, The way he is looking at me like I am something precious in the middle of this nightmare makes my throat tight and my eyes sting with tears I will not let fall. "Don't do this," I whisper. "Not here. Not now." "When, then?" His voice cracks and his grip on my hand tightens almost to the point of pain. "You blocked me. If something happens to Sophia, if I lose her." He does not finish the sentence, but he does not need to. I can hear what he is not saying, can feel it in the way he is holding my hand, like I am the only solid thing in a world coming apart. He is saying that if his sister dies tonight, he will have nothing left, no anchor, no reason to stay human, and I am terrified by the weight of that unspoken confession, terrified by the responsibility he is placing on me without asking if I want it. The coffee machine gurgles in the corner, and one of the bodyguards shifts his weight, and somewhere down the hall, a machine beeps its steady rhythm. And we sit in this awful bright room, holding hands, while his sister fights for her life in an operating room, and the world waits to see what Dominic Kane will do next. "Tell me about her childhood," I say, because I need to fill the silence with something other than fear, need to give him something to hold on to besides my hand. "Tell me what she was like before everything got complicated." So he tells me. He tells me about their parents dying when Sophia was 13, killed in what the police called a murder-suicide, but what he knows was a hit, made to look like domestic violence, punishment for their father trying to go legitimate and pull the family out of the life. He tells me about suddenly being 26 years old and responsible for a traumatized teenager who had just lost everything, about having no idea how to raise a child, but being determined to do better than their father had done. He tells me about her first day of high school, how he showed up in a suit and intimidated all the other parents, how she had been mortified, but also secretly pleased that someone cared enough to embarrass her. He tells me about teaching her to drive, about her terrible parallel parking, and her tendency to brake too hard, and the way she laughed when she finally passed her test on the third try. He tells me about birthdays and holidays, and ordinary moments that he had tried to make special despite the blood on his hands and the violence that funded their lives. He tells me about keeping her separate from the business, about the elaborate lies he has maintained to protect her innocence, about how she genuinely believes he runs a legitimate import-export company and has no idea that the men who guard their building are there to protect against rival families. He tells me about Colombia, about how proud he was when she got accepted, about how she wants to study English literature and become a teacher and live a normal life that has nothing to do with the Kane family legacy. He tells me about his sister, and with every word I hear, the love and the guilt and the desperate hope that he has given her enough good to outweigh the bad she does not know exists. And as he talks, I realize why Sophia asked for me, why she wanted the bookstore girl who makes her brother smile. I represent something normal to her, something wholesome and safe, proof that her brother has a life beyond the business he claims to run. She does not know I am a complication, does not know that her brother showing up at my door at midnight is anything other than romance, does not know that the books I recommended to her might be the last normal thing that touches this family before everything burns. The door opens and we both jerk our heads up, hands still clasped, and a surgeon enters, still wearing scrubs spattered with what I desperately hope is just saline, but suspect is blood. Dominic stands so fast his chair nearly tips over, and I stand with him, our hands breaking apart, and we face the surgeon like defendants waiting for a verdict that will determine the rest of our lives. The surgeon looks exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, and when she speaks, her voice is professionally calm, but I can hear the strain underneath. "Sophia made it through surgery," she says, and I feel Dominic's knees nearly buckle with relief. But the next 24 hours are critical. She had significant internal bleeding, and we had to remove her spleen. There was also trauma to her left leg that required extensive repair. She is young and strong, and that works in her favor, but the next day will tell us whether there are complications we have not yet seen. Dominic's voice when he asks if he can see her is barely above a whisper, And the surgeon nods and says as soon as she is settled in ICU, maybe another 30 minutes. Then she looks at me and back at Dominic and says, immediate family only in ICU, but she can wait right outside. I start to say it is fine, I can go home, this was just about getting him here. But Dominic's hand finds mine again, and he says with quiet intensity, she stays. The surgeon looks like she wants to argue, but something in Dominic's face stops her, and she just nods and says 30 minutes, and leaves us alone again with the bodyguards and the terrible fluorescent lights, and the knowledge that Sophia is alive, but not out of danger. Dominic turns to me and pulls me into a hug so sudden and tight that I cannot breathe, his face buried in my hair, his whole body shaking with relief and residual terror. Thank you, he whispers against my temple. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I stand rigid in his embrace for a moment, overwhelmed by the physicality of him, by the way he smells like rain and expensive cologne and desperation, and then my arms come up around him almost against my will, and I hold him while he falls apart in my arms, and I realize that somewhere between my apartment and this hospital, I stopped trying to maintain boundaries and started just trying to help a man survive the worst night of his life. At 4:47 a.m., the surgeon emerges from the ICU looking even more exhausted than before, and she delivers the news that makes Dominic's entire body sag with relief, so profound I have to steady him with a hand on his arm. Sophia will survive. The words are simple, but they carry the weight of salvation, and the surgeon continues with details about recovery and physical therapy and weeks of monitoring. But I can see Dominic has stopped listening after survive, has latched onto that single word like a drowning man finding shore. She needs rest, the surgeon says, but you can see her briefly, just a few minutes, and Dominic nods and thanks her with a voice that shakes. And we start moving toward the ICU when the elevator at the end of the corridor opens and everything changes. The man who steps out is flanked by 4 others in expensive suits, and I know immediately that this is someone dangerous, someone important in Dominic's world, because every one of Dominic's bodyguards goes rigid and their hands move toward their weapons in synchronized threat response. The man is older than Dominic, maybe late 40s, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that might be handsome if it were not so cold, so utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. He walks down the corridor toward us with the confidence of someone who has never been told no, never been denied anything, and his eyes find Dominic, and a smile curves his mouth that makes my skin crawl. Dominic goes absolutely still beside me, and it is not the stillness of shock or fear, but the stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike, the kind of frozen moment that precedes violence. His hand moves to my waist, and he shifts his body to position himself between me and the approaching man, and I feel the tension radiating off him in waves, feel the barely leashed fury that turns him into something terrifying. The man stops about 10 feet away, his own men fanning out behind him in a mirror of Dominic's formation, and the hospital corridor suddenly feels like a battlefield, 2 armies facing off with patients and nurses caught in the middle. Hospital security hovers uselessly near the nurses' station, unsure what to do, probably smart enough to recognize that intervening in whatever this is would be a fatal mistake. Dominic Kane, the man says, and his voice is smooth and cultured and poisonous. At a hospital, never thought I would see the day. His eyes slide past Dominic to me, and the way he looks at me makes me feel dirty. Makes me want to hide behind Dominic, even though I know that would show weakness. And with a companion, how unexpected. I do not need Dominic to tell me who this is. I know from the hatred I can feel pouring off Dominic in waves, from the way his men have their hands actually on their weapons now, from the predatory smile on the man's face. This is Vincent Marchetti, head of the rival family, the man responsible for Sophia lying in an ICU bed fighting for her life. Walk away, Vincent, Dominic says, and his voice has dropped to a lethal calm that is somehow more terrifying than shouting would be. Right now, while you still can. Marchetti spreads his hands in a gesture of false innocence, and the smile never leaves his face. I just wanted to send my regards about your sister. Terrible thing, accidents. He pauses, letting the word accidents hang in the air with all its implications. They can happen to anyone. His eyes find me again and linger, crawling over me with deliberate intention, and he continues in a voice that drips false concern. Bookstores can catch fire. Women walking home alone can find themselves in dangerous situations. The threat is not even veiled, it is explicit and direct, and I feel ice flood through my veins because he knows who I am, knows where I work, knows enough about me to make specific threats, which means I have been watched, targeted, turned into a weapon to use against Dominic. Before I can fully process this terror, before I can even draw breath to speak, Dominic moves. He moves so fast that his own men barely have time to react, closing the distance between himself and Marchetti in less than a second, and suddenly he has Marchetti against the wall with a hand around his throat and murder in his eyes. The movement is fluid and brutal and utterly controlled, the physical manifestation of violence that I have only imagined until now, and I am frozen in place, watching the man I came here with transform into something that makes every survival instinct I have scream. Touch her, Dominic says, and his voice is so quiet, I almost cannot hear it, but somehow it fills the entire corridor. Think about touching her. Breathe in her direction, and I will burn your entire family tree to ash and salt the earth where it stood. Marchetti's men move forward and Dominic's men move to intercept, and suddenly there are guns visible, actually visible in a hospital corridor at dawn, and I cannot breathe because this is going to turn into a massacre and it will be my fault for being here, for mattering to Dominic, for being the weakness that Marchetti exploited. Hospital security is on the radio calling for backup, and nurses are herding patients into rooms, and somewhere an alarm is going off, but none of it matters, because Dominic has his hand around Marchetti's throat and looks fully prepared to kill him right here, right now, consequences be damned. Then Marchetti laughs, actually laughs, even with Dominic's hand cutting off his air. And the sound breaks through the tension enough that security rushes in, 3 large men in uniforms who are stupid or brave enough to try to intervene. They pull at Dominic, shouting about the police being called, about this being a hospital, about how they need to take this outside, and after a long, terrible moment where I genuinely believe Dominic might kill them just for touching him, he releases Marchetti and steps back. Marchetti smooths his jacket with deliberate casualness, fixing his collar, and that terrible smile returns. She has made you weak, Dominic, he says, and his eyes flick to me with satisfaction. That is unfortunate for you both. Then he turns and walks back toward the elevator, his men following, and the tension drains from the corridor like water from a broken dam. Security is still there, still agitated, talking about calling the police and filing reports. But Dominic pulls something from his pocket, probably cash, or probably just his name and reputation, and suddenly they are backing away. Suddenly it is all a misunderstanding. Suddenly they did not see anything worth reporting. The institutional calm of the hospital tries to reassert itself. Nurses returning to their stations, patients being assured everything is fine, but the promise of violence still hangs in the air like smoke. Dominic turns to me, and I see him struggling to push the killer back down, to become human again. And what terrifies me most is that I am not just afraid. Part of me, some shameful part that I do not want to acknowledge, found his protectiveness attractive, found the raw violence he was willing to deploy in my defense compelling in a way that makes me hate myself. He steps toward me, and I step back instinctively, and I see the movement register in his eyes like a blow. Olivia, he starts, but I shake my head because I cannot process this right now. Cannot reconcile the man who held my hand in the waiting room with the man who just threatened to burn an entire family tree to ash. He knows about me, I whisper, and my voice sounds distant and strange to my own ears. He knows where I work. He threatened my bookstore. He threatened me. I know, Dominic says, and there is so much pain in his voice, so much guilt and fury and helplessness. I know, and I am sorry. I am so goddamn sorry. One of his men approaches cautiously and says something in Italian, probably about securing the perimeter or moving to a safer location, or any of the 1,000 things that men in his world do when threats are made and lines are crossed. Dominic responds without looking away from me, his eyes locked on mine, as if he is trying to communicate something he cannot say in words, trying to make me understand that the violence I just witnessed is both who he is and what he will do to keep me safe. The surgeon reappears, looking irritated and concerned, saying that if we want to see Sophia, it needs to be now because she needs rest, and the ICU has strict visiting hours. Dominic looks torn between his sister and me, between the family he has left and the woman he is realizing he cannot protect without destroying, and I make the choice for him. Go, I tell him. Go see Sophia, tell her I am glad she is okay. I will be outside. I need air. The lie is transparent. We both know I am not just going outside for air, I am fleeing, but he lets me go, because what choice does he have? His sister is 20 feet away, fighting for her life, and I am standing here processing the reality that being connected to him means being a target, means living with the knowledge that men like Marchetti exist and know my name and will use me as leverage whenever it suits them. I turn and walk toward the elevator, my legs shaking, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and fear and the aftermath of witnessing something I can never unsee. Behind me, I hear Dominic say my name one more time, a question and a plea, but I do not turn around. I just keep walking, past the bodyguards who watch me go with expressions I cannot read, past the nurses' station where staff are still whispering about what just happened, past all the ordinary people dealing with ordinary emergencies who have no idea how close they just came to being collateral damage in a war between families. The elevator doors close and I sag against the wall, pressing my palms to my eyes, and I know with absolute certainty that everything Marchetti said was true. I have made Dominic weak, or rather his feelings for me have created a vulnerability that his enemies will exploit, and there is no version of this story where being with him does not mean living in constant danger. The elevator descends and I think about Sophia asking for me, about Dominic holding my hand, about the way he looked at Marchetti with murder in his eyes, and I do not know if what I feel is love or terror or some toxic combination of both. When the doors open on the ground floor, I step out into the pre-dawn darkness, and I finally let myself cry. I am sitting on a bench outside the hospital, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gold of approaching sunrise, when Dominic finds me, and I do not hear him approach, but I feel his presence the way I always do, like a shift in gravity. He does not sit beside me, does not crowd me, just stands a few feet away with his hands in his pockets looking as exhausted as I feel. And for a long moment, we exist in silence, broken only by the sounds of the city waking up around us. I saw her, he says finally, and his voice is rough with emotion. She is going to be okay. She asked about you. Even drugged and half-conscious, she wanted to know if the bookstore girl came. Despite everything, despite the fear and the danger and Vincent Marchetti's threats still echoing in my head, I feel my lips curve into a small smile. What did you tell her? That you came, that you stayed, that you are more than I deserve. He pauses and then adds, she told me not to mess this up. Even half dead, she is trying to manage my love life. The word love hangs in the air between us, unacknowledged but impossible to ignore, and I stand up from the bench because I cannot have this conversation sitting down, cannot face what comes next without being able to move. Let me take you home, Dominic says, and it is not really a question, but it is not quite a demand either. Somewhere in between, and I nod because I am too tired to argue, too wrung out to figure out how to get back to Brooklyn on my own. The drive happens in silence, the same Mercedes with the same driver who tactfully does not speak, and I watch the city transform from night to morning through the tinted windows. Early commuters appear on sidewalks, delivery trucks rumble past, the diner on the corner of my street is already open with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting out. Normal life continuing while mine fractures into before and after. Before I knew what Dominic was capable of, and after I watched him nearly kill a man in a hospital corridor. The car pulls up outside my building and I expect Dominic to stay in the Mercedes, to let me go upstairs alone, but he gets out when I do, and follows me to the door. "We need to talk," he says, and I know he is right, even though every exhausted cell in my body wants to crawl into bed and pretend the last 12 hours did not happen. Mrs. Chen's apartment is quiet as we pass, Hemingway probably still sleeping on her couch, and I unlock my door and step into the space that feels both familiar and foreign, as if I have been gone for years instead of hours. Dominic follows me inside and closes the door behind him, and suddenly my small apartment feels even smaller, filled with his presence and everything unspoken between us. Sunrise is streaming through the windows now, golden light illuminating the dust motes and the shelves of books, and the wilted white roses still on my counter. I turn to face him, and all the words I have been holding back come pouring out in a rush. "I cannot do this," I say, and my voice breaks on the last word. Marchetti proved every fear I had. Being with you means being a target. It means living in danger. It means watching you nearly kill someone because he threatened me. I cannot live like that, Dominic. I cannot be the reason you lose control. I cannot be your weakness. He stands perfectly still, letting me rage and cry and pace across my small living room, and he does not argue or defend or try to convince me I am wrong. He just watches me with those dark eyes that have haunted me for 3 weeks, and when I finally run out of words and collapse onto my couch with my head in my hands, he speaks. "You are right," he says simply, "about all of it. Being with me does make you a target. It does mean danger. But there is something you do not know, something I have been trying to figure out how to tell you since the moment I walked into your bookstore." He pulls his phone from his pocket and sits beside me on the couch, careful not to touch me, maintaining a distance that feels both respectful and agonizing. He opens something on his phone and hands it to me, and I find myself looking at what appears to be official FBI documents, emails, case files, all marked with classifications I do not fully understand. I scroll through in growing disbelief, seeing Dominic's name over and over, seeing the Marchetti family, seeing terms like confidential informant and witness protection and RICO prosecution. 3 weeks, I say, and my voice sounds hollow. You have been lying to me for 3 weeks about everything. No, he says, and his voice is fierce and urgent. I never lied about what I felt. I just did not tell you I was trying to burn my whole world down to be worthy of feeling it. He takes the phone from my nerveless fingers and pulls up a contact. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, Organized Crime Division, with a call history going back 2 years. It takes years to build a case like this, he says. Years of being a monster to catch monsters. When I walked into your bookstore, I was 6 months from finishing. I was so close to getting out, to going legitimate, to leaving this life behind. Then I saw you on that ladder, and you blushed, and every reason I had for staying away from you became a reason to finish faster. I stare at him, trying to process what he is telling me, trying to reconcile the man who threatened to burn Marchetti's family tree to ash with the man who has apparently been working with the FBI for 2 years to take down that same family. You are trying to get out, I say slowly, testing the words. You are building a case. You are going to testify. He nods, and I see the weight of it in his eyes, the exhaustion of living a double life, of being a monster while trying to stop being one. The Marchetti family, the Costellos, the Russos, all of them. I have been gathering evidence on all of them, bank records, shipping manifests, recordings of meetings, Everything the FBI needs to prosecute and convict. It is why Marchetti came to the hospital tonight, why he is escalating. He knows something is wrong, knows someone inside is feeding information, he just does not know it is me yet. The danger of what he is telling me crashes over me like a wave. If they find out, I whisper. If anyone discovers you are working with the FBI, they will kill me, he says bluntly, slowly and painfully, and they will make it a message to anyone else who thinks about betraying the families. Which is why I have been so careful, why I have kept Sophia out of it, why I tried to keep you out of it. But then I met you and I was selfish and I could not stay away, and now Marchetti knows about you and everything is more complicated. Marchetti threatened me, I say, and I hear my voice shake. He knows about the bookstore, he knows I matter to you, which is why I need you to choose, Dominic says, and he turns to face me fully, his expression more serious than I have ever seen it. Right now. Tonight proved I cannot keep you at arm's length and keep you safe. Either you are all in, you trust me, you let me protect you fully until this is over, or I disappear from your life. Completely. Protective custody, new identity, whatever it takes to keep you safe. But I cannot do this halfway anymore. The ultimatum should make me angry, but instead, it just makes me tired, because I understand what he is saying, understand that the middle ground I was trying to maintain is an illusion. There is no casual relationship with Dominic Kane, no keeping things light and uncommitted, not when his world operates in absolutes of loyalty and betrayal, safety and danger, all in or all out. What happens when the case is done? I ask, because I need to know what I am choosing, need to understand the full scope of what he is offering. If I survive? He does not flinch from the if, does not try to sugarcoat the danger. I disappear too. New name, new life, witness protection. The price of testimony. The government will relocate me somewhere far from New York, give me a new identity, and I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting for the families to find me. He looks at me with devastating honesty, with a vulnerability I have never seen in him before. I am asking you to consider disappearing with me. The words hang in the air between us, enormous and terrifying, and somehow also the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. He is not asking me to date him, or be his girlfriend, or any normal relationship milestone. He is asking me to leave my entire life behind, to trust him with my safety and my future, to bet everything on a man I have known for 3 weeks, and a love that should not be possible in such a short time. I stand up and pace to the window, looking out at my street, at the bodega across the way, and the people walking past with coffee cups and briefcases, at the ordinary world that suddenly feels impossibly distant. My bookstore is down there, my whole life, everything my parents left me. Mrs. Chen is in the apartment next door, and my friends are scattered across the city, and my routines and my safety and my carefully constructed existence are all here. Dominic is offering me a future that involves none of that, a future that is all uncertainty and danger and the possibility of love if we survive long enough to build it. You met me at the worst possible time, I say to the window, to my reflection, to the sunrise. He comes to stand behind me, close enough that I can feel his warmth, but still not touching. I know, he says quietly. I have thought that every day since I walked into your bookstore. I should have stayed away. I should have bought my book from someone else, should have left you alone, should have protected you by never letting you matter to me. But I was selfish and weak, and I could not help myself. I turn to face him, and I see in his eyes the same conflict I feel in my chest, the war between what we should do and what we want to do, between safety and connection, between the smart choice and the right one. If I say no, I ask, if I tell you to disappear from my life, will you actually do it? Yes, he says without hesitation. I will have my people set you up with protective custody under a different name until the trials are over and the families are dismantled. You will be safe. You will never see me again. But Sophia, she asked for me. You cannot protect her and me and yourself all at the same time. I can try, he says, and there is something desperate in his voice now. I have been trying. But you are right. The resources are finite. The danger is real. And keeping everyone safe might be impossible. Which is why I need you to choose what you want, rather than what you think you should want. I sink back onto the couch, and Hemingway appears from wherever he has been hiding, probably under my bed, and he jumps into my lap and starts purring as if the world is not ending, as if I am not being asked to make an impossible choice. Dominic sits beside me again, and this time he reaches out and takes my hand, and the gesture is so gentle, so full of everything he is not saying, that I feel tears start again. I am terrified, I whisper, of the danger, of the violence, of loving you and losing you, of giving up everything I know for a future that might not exist. I know, he says, and he brings my hand to his lips and kisses my knuckles. I am terrified too. I have done terrible things, Olivia. I have hurt people. I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. I am trying to do better, trying to make amends, trying to earn a future where I deserve someone like you, but I do not know if redemption is actually possible for men like me. You are trying, I say, and I turn my hand in his to lace our fingers together. That has to count for something. The FBI thinks so. They would not be working with you if they did not believe you could help take down the families. He looks at me, and I see hope flicker in his eyes, fragile and tentative. So what are you saying? I do not know yet, I admit. I need you to give me a minute to think. We sit in silence as the sun rises higher, and the city wakes up fully around us, and I think about everything that has happened in the last 12 hours, everything I have learned, everything I have seen. I think about Sophia asking for me, even as she went into surgery. I think about Dominic, sitting in my hallway at midnight refusing to leave. I think about the way he held my hand in the hospital, and the way he looked at Marchetti when the threat was made. I think about 2 years of building a case, of living a double life, of trying to escape a legacy of violence. I think about what it means to choose safety versus what it means to choose love, and I realize they might not be as mutually exclusive as I thought. If I do this, I say slowly, if I say I am all in, what does that actually look like? Dominic's grip on my hand tightens and he says, it means you let me assign security to you until the trials are over. It means you probably cannot stay at the bookstore, at least not alone. It means adjusting your life to account for the danger. It means trusting me to keep you safe, even though tonight proved how hard that is. And after the trials, if we both survive, it means disappearing together into witness protection and building a new life somewhere else. I look around my apartment, at the books and the memories and the life I have built here, and I try to imagine walking away from all of it. Then I look at Dominic, exhausted and vulnerable and honest in a way I suspect he has never been with anyone else, and I try to imagine walking away from him. The choice should be impossible, but somehow it is not, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, this man has become essential to me in a way that defies logic and time and common sense. I pull out my phone and open my contacts and find his name, still blocked from last night, and I look at him and say, if I unblock your number, does that count as an answer? His breath catches, and something that looks like hope and disbelief and overwhelming relief crosses his face. Are you sure? This is not a small thing, Olivia. This is your whole life. I know, I say, and I press unblock, and immediately his phone buzzes in his pocket with all the messages that have been trying to get through since I blocked him. But apparently, my whole life is not as important to me as you are, and that is either the smartest thing I have ever realized or the dumbest, and I guess we will find out which. He pulls me into his arms so fast I do not have time to prepare, and he kisses me like a man who has been drowning and just found air, desperate and grateful and full of promise. When we finally break apart, we are both breathing hard, and I can feel my heart pounding against my ribs. I am all in, I tell him, my hands fisted in his shirt. But if you die on me, Dominic Kane, I will kill you myself. He laughs for the first time since I have known him, actually laughs with genuine joy, and the sound transforms his face into something younger and lighter and full of hope. Deal, he says, and he kisses me again, softer this time. And outside the window, the city continues its morning routine, completely unaware that my life has just divided into before and after. Before I chose Dominic Kane, and after I decided that love might be worth the danger after all.